Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind, episode 98.
The only way to lead a really meaningful life is to be of service to other people, to help other people. And then, if you can manage it, to do so without expecting anything in return. So it's just about giving.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Ira Israel. Ira is a licensed counselor, a licensed psychotherapist, and a certified yoga therapist. He has a graduate degree in psychology, philosophy, and religious studies, and teaches mindfulness and yoga at Esalen Institute and throughout the United States. Welcome, Ira.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today.
Well, it's going to be a fun discussion that we're going to have. I just want to know kind of how we'll start off with, I want you to tell our audience a little bit more about how you came to all these things that you're doing and how your paradigm kind of changed over time and with your experiences.
Well, starting in 1985 in January, I was badly hurt in a car accident. And when I was recuperating, I started to ask those existential questions that people ask. And then after that physical recuperation, I set off on a journey to find the meaning of life. And what's interesting about it is that, I was essentially for 25 years flying by the seat of my pants. And, I just felt compelled to get a master's degree in philosophy after going to the University of Pennsylvania. So I went back to school immediately and studied Nietzsche and literature and aesthetics and art for a year. And then I went to New York for a couple of years and worked and I wrote. And then I went to Paris for a couple of years. And then I went back to school in New York. And the whole time I was just, if something compelled me, like a friend of mine once called me up and said, "Hey, I got this great brochure to go to Thailand. Like, do you want to go?" And so I had a vacation at the time, and I said, sure. And we bought tickets and we went. And that is really where my eyes opened up, because I think there's a very small percentage of Americans, like 25% or something like that, who have passports. And for me, firstly, living in Paris just opened up my way of seeing things, to understand that there are people who have other priorities than we as Americans have. And then when I went to Thailand in '94, I got hurt, and a woman healed me with her hands, which I didn't know really existed. And then after that, I started studying Buddhism and Hinduism, and that led me to practicing yoga, and then taking the second master's degree in the history of mindfulness, which is Buddhism essentially, and then the history of yoga, which is Hinduism. I've just been on this intense path for 25 years, and then it kind of all came together, I'd say in 2009, exactly 25 years after the accident, when I was teaching yoga and I was doing my internship. I had already gone to graduate school in psychology, and I was teaching at Rodney Reed's studio, and a woman came into my class, and she put her hands down, and I can't explain it, but some kind of feeling came over me where I just heard, like, you have to make DVDs. And I never had the idea of being in front of the camera. I never, considered myself, I don't know, I didn't think of any of these things, but as soon as I heard that voice or got that feeling, it kind of put those 25 years together, because if you had looked at any point in time and said, oh, you're going to get a master's degree in philosophy, what are you going to do with that? Paint houses? Or you're going to get a master's degree in Buddhism and Hinduism, like, what are you going to do with that? Like, work at 7-Eleven, right? Or, like the things that I had been studying for 25 years, didn't have like a value in our culture. So it was really fascinating for me to all of a sudden find that it made sense. You know what I mean? Like that, like my search and going to spending 6 weeks in India, spending 6 weeks in Indonesia, spending 6 weeks in Thailand, and just trying to understand that in other cultures, there are other ways of seeing the world. There's other ways of seeing relationships. There's other ways of thinking about what's important and money. So, you know, I got hurt in the car accident and I didn't receive a lot of money considering, you know, but it was enough to enable me, because probably, you know, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to just, you know, up and move to Paris for 3 years. And during that time, you know, it was 1991 and there weren't cell phones and people were just hanging out in cafes and they'd read and they'd write and they'd go to museums. And, you know, I didn't even speak French, but I started meeting people and just following my instinct, going down that rabbit hole of curiosity to try to assimilate in this completely foreign culture. And it was just a really educational experience. And then, you know, as I said, from there, I don't even think before then I ever had the idea, I should go to, you know, Asia. But after a couple of years in Paris, someone called me up and said, let's see what Asia's about. And so I started exploring there. So it's a very non-conventional journey. And there's been several distinct instances where I've had my paradigm shifted.
Well, and do you want to kind of go into that? Was it the car accident that caused you to kind of be searching? Because it sounds like it was kind of a 25-year search, you know, of trying to figure out who you were. I mean, was that the beginning of it? Exactly, kind of give us a little bit more detail on how what was going on inside you, either spiritually or, you know, intellectually, to lead you to discover what you love to do now.
I think it's really interesting because I can look back on it and see how sequential it was in terms of me trying to learn things in Europe about existentialism, you know, because all of their philosophy. I can make a joke, but I'll make a joke first and then I'll be serious. But there's a beautiful quote by Nietzsche, I think it's an Ecce Homo or the Antichrist, where he says, you should never trust a German philosopher because the Germans eat soup after their main course. Thus, their philosophy is based completely on indigestion. So that's the joke. But the truth is that, you know, after World War II, there was Sartre and other quote-unquote existentialists that had lived through this absolute horror, this monstrosity, you know, like millions of people just burned and killed. And so for me going there and trying to understand the emphasis that they had in their culture on, I want to say, expressing themselves artistically. Do you know what I mean? Like through music and art and literature. So the first part of my journey, looking back, was having my eyes open to this other paradigm of like, oh wow, look, people make films about the Sturm und Drang, the emotional components of life. If you go to like Bergman films and things like that, which is what I was exposed to in the first part of that, you know, 25-year journey, was just this intellectual, artistic quest to kind of like, oh, look at what Mahler was doing in classical music. You know, like it was a very tumultuous time, turn of the century. He was born a Jew but became a Catholic, you know, and so when I started to go down the rabbit hole of European intellectuals and philosophers and musicians and artists and film directors and writers, that was like the first component. And then, as I said, when I got hurt in Thailand, then it opened up this whole other paradigm of spirituality. Like there's a whole infinite world of things that we don't know that we don't know. So for me, getting hurt in Thailand and having someone, you know, I didn't believe that someone could heal me with their hands. I literally said, no, thank you. Like that's witchcraft. But then when it happened to me, then that set me off just question, like, wow, like, is this scientific paradigm, is it accurate? Is it the most interesting? Thomas Kuhn very famously in 1968 said that the paradigm shifts in our culture every 25 years. But now in the information age, if you tried to explain to your grandmother that a black man would be president, gay people could marry, you'd get cash money from a hole in the wall. If you tried to explain to people in the 1950s that there will be this thing called an iPhone, it'll take pictures, it'll hold 50,000 songs, it'll enable you to see people in China in real time on FaceTime. You couldn't envision those things in the 1950s. It's interesting because when I grew up in the 60s, I was young, we had the Jetsons. I think it was late 60s, early 70s, and you just thought that was like, that was fantasy land. And now when you see the technologies that we're building, it's really fascinating. So anyways, I digress, but what I meant to say was that the second part of the journey was essentially spiritual, and that was me just going down the rabbit hole of yoga and then Buddhism and meditation, and then finally a little bit of Kabbalah, which I think they all intersect beautifully at certain points. And then the third part of the journey was about relationships, and that started in about 2003, and then it led me into studying psychology and trying to understand things like how therapy supposedly works, or what Freud was saying, and trying to do with psychoanalysis. And so, at any point in time, if you looked at where I was and said, did you know that in 6 years you will be a mindfulness teacher, you will be a psychotherapist, you will make DVDs about depression, anxiety, happiness? I would have said, no, that's absurd. I'm just doing this thing. But looking back on that journey, it all makes perfect sense.
So is there something that you would have changed about your education to maybe help you come to this paradigm shift sooner? Or do you think that, having to take that long journey is part of what makes you who you are today?
Well, it's funny because I took all these courses that are not part of my formal education, and what I learned through them is essentially everyone is on their own timeline. So for me, I took a compassion workshop at the University of California at Berkeley in 2008 with Fred Luskin. And I ended up just as like an exploration finding the driver of the car. I was a passenger in 1985. And finding the driver on Facebook and going through this process and forgiving him. And that is, it's funny because I tell people when I teach my classes, I say, I feel like I'm an idiot for taking 25 years to do something that was so simple, to release myself from all of the resentment and from the suffering that I was causing myself through not forgiving this person. But in doing so, I bought myself 50 years of freedom. So you can't look back with woulda, coulda, shoulda, didn't. I wish I had gone to Yale. I wish this had happened or that had happened. You can't change the past, so there's no sense in complaining about it. You have to embrace every single aspect of it, whether your mind says, that pain was so horrifying. I don't want to, I wish I didn't live through that, but, you did, and you're here. So it's about being present and being able to continue to, bring that authentic presence, into your day-to-day life for as long as you're here visiting planet Earth. Wow.
So do you think the inability to forgive was the biggest obstacle that you faced, or was there something else? Yeah. And then what did...
Absolutely. No, It was definitely the inability to forgive. You hit it right on the head, because if you're unwilling to forgive, what you're really trying to do is share your suffering. What you're trying to do is pay your suffering forward. If you look at the human race, you can make an argument to say that we enjoy paying our suffering forward. And so the Buddha taught something called skillful means. And so what I teach is you must be the one who breaks the chain of unskillful solutions. Revenge or even grievance stories, anything, harboring any grudge is your desire to pay your suffering forward. So it's the strong person who says, I will not pay my suffering forward. It ends with me. I clean the past. I release whatever happened, and I forgive whomever I have to forgive, including myself.
So do you think that victim mentality of us being that constant victim, how does a person go about changing that attitude?
I think it's called the law of Hammurabi, if I'm not mistaken, which is an eye for an eye. So that's what our moral code is based upon. And then Mahatma Gandhi famously framed it as, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. So we have this legal code where we say, essentially, I need to know that you understand how bad you made me feel. And the only way I can do that is by inflicting the same amount of pain on you that you inflicted on me. So, that's the philosophy behind an eye for an eye.
That is an interesting, that's a very old set of laws, but yeah, we do keep that current. It's kind of this undercurrent running through our society.
Right, but look where that's gotten us. We have the wall between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Because there are two cultures based on the law of Hammurabi. So, until those, it's so, all of these subjects are so tender and so delicate, and really, that's why it's a fascinating question. Why when you ask me, are you sad that it took 25 years? No, because there is this, we have maladaptive tendencies. Someone cuts you off on the highway, and immediately, you burst out. If you're alone in your car, or maybe it's just me, but if I'm alone in my car, no matter how...
I doubt it's just you.
Right. No matter how... I could have been meditating for 6 hours, and I could be joyful and happy. For some reason in my mind, it's a black Cadillac Escalade with the windows down and bad music blaring. And if I'm driving down the street and that person goes across 6 lanes in front of me with no indicator signal, it doesn't matter how happy I am. I want to express this person that this is some sort of cosmic injustice. You could have killed me. You could kill someone else. You need to be more responsible. And so, I'll find myself just getting very agitated. So it's funny, there's no there. It's just that we need the best tools possible so that we can cull our maladaptive reactions.
Go a little bit more into what kind of your current philosophy is and what you teach, what your message is to people that, embrace your philosophy. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So it's funny, because of the spirituality that I studied, first in Thailand and then in India, my understanding of the world is that we're all basically interconnected in some way, and that distinctions between people are not so great. We really have to stop the survival of the fittest mentality and the scarcity consciousness that we have. Gore Vidal famously said, in America, it's not enough that I succeed, all my friends must fail.
Oh.
And so what I teach is the opposite, which is essentially, I can't be great unless you're great. So I have these tools, and I want to share these tools with you. And the tools are essentially, besides basic things like eating properly, meaning don't follow what the U.S. government tells you is the mandate for, find out by research what's good for your body. Some people need certain things, some people don't. And so that's a really worthwhile investment. So that's a basic thing. Find out you would, if you had a Ferrari, you would have put toothpaste into the gas engine, right? So,
yeah.
Don't try to fuel your body with junk. right? So that's like a basic thing. Like you need to survive. You need to be healthy. So that's like one very basic thing. And then after that, there are tools such as yoga and meditation, and they cultivate, I want to say, the way I would expect it, it's like you taste the nectar of the inherent peace and calm that's in your body when you practice meditation or when you practice yoga. And then when things trigger you later in the day, you can make healthier long-term decisions about how you want to interact with other people, because we're all going to get triggered. We all have some sort of core issue, whether it's lack of self-worth or, this idea that you'll always be taken advantage of, or, we all have these patterns, these like mental patterns in our head. And they're very difficult to, you can't get rid of them. And it will take years to undo these patterns. Once you sit down and start to, itemize, you're like, wow, like that's, getting up in the morning and having a martini, like that's a bad pattern. Like that will not, that does not keep me at the high end of my happiness range. So, I'm going to avoid that, So it's just about making conscious decisions about how you want to, live your days on planet Earth. And the one thing that I try to get people to realize is that the most important thing that correlates with long-term happiness is not money, is not even sex, the quality of your connections, your attachment to other people. Like, do you have someone's back? Do they have your back? Can you trust these people? That's what correlates as strongly with happiness. So basically, in one capacity or another, I'm always teaching, whether I have a psychotherapy client or if I'm teaching at Esalen, I'm teaching tools that'll help keep people at the high end of their happiness ranges. And for me, it's a little running, eating correctly, having tea or coffee with friends, going to a yoga class, taking a walk on the beach, going to a great movie, listening to amazing music, traveling to, going to a museum. So, I know what works for me. Probably not going to work for anyone else because we're all different. But, I can tell you the things to look for. Famously, Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss, right?
Yeah.
So those things that, when you're sitting there, for me, if I'm, I love music. I really, really get inspired by music. And I love watching, a band play music, or, 5 people play jazz, or going to a symphony and seeing, 100 people, working together to make this beautiful sound. So for me, that inspires me. So, everybody has to find their bliss, what inspires them, what makes them get up in the morning and do the things that they do.
Before we go on, let us take a minute and hear about our sponsors. Homeschooling but need help covering all the important subjects? Want to make sure you're thoroughly covering science, history, civics, trying to get arts and language skills into your student homeschooling? How about creative writing? The answer is Connect the Thoughts, a proven secular curriculum for ages 5 through high school. For over 10 years, Connect the Thoughts has improved educational results for over 20,000 homeschoolers. Hundreds of parents, student success stories tell the tale. Connect the Thoughts, the best homeschooling curriculum available. Use the link at theluminousmind.net podcast show notes page and download free samples today. Welcome back to Luminous Mind with Ira Israel. So it sounds to me like your message is a lot about taking ownership of what, each individual. I mean, we're kind of through the whole blaming other people, but really studying yourself and figuring out how you can be more of a benefit to the world. Is that kind of the message that you're talking about?
Well, I would say absolutely. But the way I like to see it is that we're all on our individual healing journeys. I don't know if that's too woo-woo a term for your audience, but
no.
We're all...
I'm sure we all have past hurts, right? I mean, there's
exactly.
No matter how blissful your childhood is, there's got to be something in there.
Well, it's more about, I look at it as, I'd rather, if you had to place blame somewhere, it would be on our competitive school system or, just the way capitalism is based on survival of the fittest and scarcity mentality, so that we grow up not to trust other people. And so, yes, we all have a core issue. We're all wounded in some ways. And what I have learned is that, you have to do that 25-year journey. Hopefully for other people, it only takes a week or two, but, you have to sort out, intellectually, your paradigm, how you see the world mentally operating. And then you have to, find out, what you believe spiritually. Is there a greater force than you? Is that force benevolent? Is that force malevolent? How do you believe you're interacting with this universe? And then psychologically, we all have to come over what I said before as our triggers, because we get triggered in certain ways that make us experience emotions that are unpleasant. So at the end of all that, once you go through this overcoming, then the one thing you learn, I think, is that the only way to lead a really meaningful life is to be of service to other people, to help other people. And then, if you can manage it, to do so without expecting anything in return. So it's just about giving. There's a beautiful, let's see if I can remember it correctly, when the actor Charlie Sheen imploded publicly on television and had this whole weird thing with $25,000 of cocaine and porn stars and all this stuff. The paparazzi rushed Martin Sheen, his father, at the Colonnade, the place in Malibu, and they rushed him and they said, Martin, what do you do when your son implodes publicly and destroys his life, on television and YouTube and all this? And Martin just looked at the camera and he said, you have to love more.
That's true. Very true. It doesn't get us anywhere to not do that.
Yeah. Right. You just, obviously we all have these wounds, and you just have to pick yourself back up and you just have to love more.
Wow. So tell us more about the services you offer and then some successes that you've seen with people who follow kind of your message and what you're doing.
Well, I have a private practice, so I work with individuals here in Los Angeles, and to me, that's fascinating, and it's fascinating because of the way psychology has evolved over the past 120 years or so, because there's a lot of things that are about the relationship. So the thing that I'm tracking when clients come in is, what is the emotionally corrective experience that this person is subconsciously looking for? Meaning that when that person was 6 or 8 years old and they came home proudly with 85 on their exam and their parents said, not now, we don't want to hear it. And so the child assimilated that as, whatever I do is not good enough, right? Because that's what children do, right? So if you have that particular core wound, then me being the surrogate parent in the relationship of psychotherapy, then I'm trying to track where you're at with that not good enough message that you're continuously, playing in your head. And then I'm just trying to correct it by saying, yeah, that's great. That is good enough. No, you couldn't do any better. So on the individual level, that's been really satisfying, and I've seen a lot of people either do things. I try to inspire people to do what they really want to do. There's this thing in America called golden handcuffs. which is that if you got out of school and follow, let's say you became a lawyer, and so after 10 years you became a partner, and so at that time you got married and you bought a house, so you have this nut of, let's just say, $30,000 a month to pay for one of your kids in college and the mortgage on the house and this expense and that expense. But all of a sudden you decide or you realize, like, I hate being a lawyer. I always wanted to be a painter, but you're not necessarily going to make $30,000 a month, like as a painter, your first month out the door. So that's an interesting thing to navigate when people realize that their vocation, their calling in life is not matching up with their job. And so they need some guidance in terms of like how to phase out of one career and then do what's going to make them fulfilled. So that's one thing that I really enjoy doing.
Kind of getting rid of that discontent that's in our society. There are a lot of societal expectations that are put on us. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Yeah.
And awesome. Particularly, we're going through this momentous time of gender roles and the expectations around them, and also how we earn money. There was a fascinating article in The Guardian 3 days ago on the end of capitalism. It was very provocative, but the part that was interesting to me is that I am a member of a class of people as a psychotherapist and a yoga teacher and meditation teacher and a DVD. Like, I'm an independent contractor. So basically, I'm working all the time. Like most of the people I know, there's not like I physically shut off my telephone and my computer at night. But, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the first thing I do is I have to respond to emails. So that's technically work. So there's been this odd blending of leisure time and work time for people like me. And I guess even people who have 9 to 5s, which are really, I saw a cartoon recently, and they said a 40-hour work week is now, a vacation is now considered a 40-hour work week. Like if you only work 40 hours a week, that's now considered a vacation. Wow. So we've had, people in America have had this shift in the way they perceive what they're supposed to be doing. There's that phrase from a couple of years ago, crazy busy. And when you meet people, like you say, how are you? And they don't say, most people in America are stressed out. Like there's a lot of people struggling. There's a lot of people living lives of quiet desperation, not being fulfilled. And so, the people who thought that they would be happy when they accomplished the American dream and find themselves unhappy feel betrayed, right?
Yeah.
Which is normal. So in my classes, I try to get people to, reevaluate what they think is important in life. As I started this conversation, I said, my paradigm shifted when I went to Asia and saw people eating dinner together and doing, not eating in their car, like the things that are important in other parts of the world, just having dinner parties, for instance, or just going over someone's house and having a tea or coffee and chatting or taking a walk or things like that. A lot of Americans these days don't have time for that or don't feel they have time for that or don't make time for that. And, they kind of think that through instant messenger or texting that they're getting their soul filled or nourished, but they're actually not. We're interdependent creatures. We really need to be with other people and not be, traveling like in a car or have earbuds in when we're on an airplane or in the supermarket and, pretending we're invisible and not interacting with other people. So we're at a really fascinating time where roles are shifting and people are experiencing all sorts of disappointments and betrayals and things. So for me, I just give people fresh perspectives, whether it's in the psychotherapy office or whether it's at Esalen or whether I do a lot of public talks, and I basically have a lot of tricks that show people that, I mean, I don't want to give this away, but like we are our own worst enemies. And it's basically because of the way we see things. You know, the glass is either half full or half empty. So I'm teaching people to re-envision their lives as, wow, I have 2 legs. You know, I have enough money. I have enough money to go to lunch. You know, 3.5 billion people live on less than $1.50 a day. 6,500 children are going to die tonight in Africa of diarrhea and one other disease that we can cure by going to Walgreens or CVS. You know, like we're some of the most privileged human beings to ever walk the face of the earth, and yet we're not happy as a culture. We're you know, so that's why I teach happiness.
Yeah, instilling that more of a grateful attitude, maybe, back into our society.
It's a choice. You know, you can either see, you know, what you don't have. You can sit there and you can compare yourself to Bill Gates, or you can compare yourself to the homeless person that you're going to pass on the way, you know, out of the restaurant or out of the grocery store this afternoon. So it's about noticing and the big picture and really understanding that, like, this is amazing. Like, I get to sit here talking on my iPhone to Rebecca, and it's going to be put on the internet. Like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, this is, in the history of humanity, this is like one of the, as big as going to the moon, I'd say. Just what we're doing right now.
Well, and if we finally acknowledge, you know, that gratefulness, like you said, and have that happiness, maybe there won't be that homeless man on the corner. You know, I mean, we do so much comparison, like we're not, like you said, we're not this or that, but we don't look around. We want to shut ourselves off and unplug from the world, and doing that is affecting so many people. So.
Well, that's why I said that the one thing I learned was that at the end of our healing journeys, when we kind of sorted out the way we want the world to be, again, Gandhi said, you know, you have to be the change you want to see in the world. So you have to be the one who says, you know, I'm not going to walk by that homeless person without smiling or saying have a nice day or giving $1 or whatever you can do. So you can be the change, and you have to decide, like, what kind of world that you want to live in. If you want people to have your back and help you, then you have to help other people and have their back.
Yeah. Once again, we're operating out of that scarcity instead of out of the abundance that we have. So.
Yeah, and again, it's very interesting, that article I cited in The Guardian a couple of days ago, and a lot of economists will tell you the point we are in the agricultural, industrial, and now information age is we actually do have enough food to feed everyone on the planet. Like, we could do it if we wanted to. So it's kind of, again, that Herbert Spencer survival of the fittest mentality, where we believe there's a reason, you know, like that these people, they obviously are not smart enough to feed themselves, or they can't do something. And so, you know, the world is shifting toward a more compassionate understanding. And the interesting thing is, you know, T.S. Eliot famously asked, like, will the next culture come with a bang or a whimper? Like, will we slide into it gracefully, or will there be some sort of revolution or a terrible earthquake or tsunami, or, you know, like, how are we going to get to that next place where we realize that we don't have to be so competitive, that you can actually be loving and have a good life and, you know, just inspire other people to do the same, so that we can live more harmoniously than we currently do.
Yeah, the overall message I'm getting is, let's live our life with the abundance. I don't know. It's super inspiring. So what advice or encouragement would you give to somebody who's kind of wanting to get out of that scarcity attitude, or the kind of pigeonholing themselves in what society thinks they should be doing? What's the first thing you think they should do?
As I said when we started, you know, I flew by the seat of my pants, and for me, it was embracing my sense of wonder, or maybe in terms of your question, I would say cultivating a sense of wonder. I mean, there's literally infinite things to to learn in life, right? And Wittgenstein famously said, language is a cage, right? So if you can only think in one language, you have to understand that that's a cage. That's not, you're not free. Your mind tricks you into thinking, oh, I can think these things, so I'm so smart. But the average person has 50 to 70,000 thoughts every day, and 90 to 95% of them are the same bad thoughts that you had yesterday. Our thoughts are essentially redundant and negative. Our mind has a negativity bias because that's what helped us survive our childhood, like that fear. But living authentically means shedding your prejudices, shedding those fears that kept you alive. And so for me, embracing my curiosity and sense of wonder, I'm like, wow, like what made Mahler write these epic symphonies? Or what made Picasso paint a woman's head so that looks like a bowl of fruit? Or like what, just asking these questions and the internet is just this amazing thing that anybody can just go to it and type in 3 words and go down a rabbit hole of, go to Wikipedia. And what was I researching last night? Oh, I watched a documentary on Banksy, the artist in New York. The artist from London. And the documentary was an HBO documentary on him doing a 31-day residency in New York, but nobody knows who he is really. Only a couple of people have ever met him, and he was putting up these incredibly provocative artworks all over the city. And in one of them, he took a painting that he bought for $60 from a pawn shop, and then he painted something onto it, and he gave it back, unbeknownst to them, he donated it back to them. But because he had put his stamp on it and signed it, it was now worth $250,000.
Wow.
So, and they sold it, and the money went to help people with HIV. And so it's like, for me, having that power, and like Banksy does, and using it to raise consciousness and to help other people, when there's nothing in it for him, there's no benefit, he didn't want any publicity. He took a painting, he signed it, Banksy, he put a little thing in it. He actually entitled it "The Banality of Evil" after Hannah Arendt's subtitle from her book. And so he made this mediocre artwork into this great artwork, and but didn't take any, basically donated all the money to a cause. Yeah. But he did so in this raising way, so that it gets you to think what's important in our, if Picasso was alive today and he signed a napkin Picasso, and then someone sold it for $100,000, because it was signed Picasso. It's the same napkin. Another person would just not notice the signature and blow their nose in it, and it's worth nothing. So, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
So to me, then after I watched the documentary, I just started going down that Wikipedia, Google rabbit hole, going to Banksy's website, going to see what was written about him. So that's the only message I like to leave people with, is follow your bliss, what makes you inspired, what makes you curious about what we're doing on this planet. Because there's a quote by Shakespeare from Hamlet where Hamlet says, there's more in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in your philosophy. So, we know all these things, but I always tell people with my 3 graduate degrees and a token, I can ride the bus. Knowledge is not important. It's what I said before about, Martin Sheen. You have to love more, which means you have to be vulnerable. You have to be able to go out there and interact with humanity in a positive, loving way, instead of the fear-based way that most of us have been taught.
Yeah. So is that the legacy that you'd like to leave, or is there something else that you think of that you'd like to be remembered for?
I'm totally unconcerned with that. It never crosses my mind. It's more about I know that I'm going to go up to Esalen in 5 weeks. I know that I'm going to be in a room with 50 people, and they're all going to be at different points in their healing journey. And I have to meet every individual, at that point that will inspire them and affect their lives the most. And so that's the type of thing I think about. It's like, and I'm going to walk down now to the beach after this conversation, and, you know, there's going to be someone who crosses my path who either maybe they're there to teach me something or I'm there to teach them something, but it's just about being fluid through life and embracing everything that has happened to you and that is happening to you.
Like live each day, you know, like you said earlier, kind of live in that moment, not and enjoy that moment maybe. So
be here now.
Awesome.
There's no, you know.
Well, before we say goodbye, do you have a final, like maybe a favorite quote? And then give us your contact information of how our audience can get in touch with you.
Well, I'm really, really proud because I just finished my 5th DVD, and this one is A Beginner's Guide to Happiness. So if you go to my website, which is www.iraisrael.com, and then hit DVDs, you can see the first 3 minutes of you can see the first 3 minutes of all of my DVDs. There's one for mindfulness for depression, mindfulness for anxiety, A Beginner's Guide to Mindfulness, and then yoga for depression and anxiety. But the new one is really special because, you know, as I said, the thing that we're all interested in is like being more content. And as I said, there are tools that keep people at the higher ends of their happiness ranges, and they're proven for the last couple of thousand years. And unfortunately, we grew up in a culture, I'll make a joke and I'll just say, like, of sex, drugs, rock and roll, let's say. And so, like, we think that those things make us happy because we see, you know, Britney Spears or Justin Bieber on the cover of a magazine and they look happy. So we assume, like, oh, I should get a tattoo that says this, or I should put on this makeup, or I could do that, or cut my hair like this. But all those things are really transitory. The things that make you happy are, you know, connecting with other people. So that's what I try to teach is authenticity, people authentically connecting with other human beings.
That is great. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Ira. I'm going to I'll put all of his contact information on our show notes. And then also I'm going to embed a YouTube video called How to Own Your Life, which is by Ira Israel as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Ira Israel, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and consider joining our program by going to the scheduling tab to become a fire starter today. Help support the podcast by making all your Amazon purchases through the free Amazon widget on our website. Also, sign up to receive 2 free audiobooks from Audible at theluminousmind.net. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, and now Pinterest. Get our audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider telling your friends about us. Leave us a review. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.